do you tune in with your intuition before jumping into whatever ChatGPT tells you?
Hans Rosling founded the Gapminder Foundation. It was very simple. He brought down facts back to a fact-based reality that we have a common ground to stand on. And he was not in that utopian optimism, everything will be good, or this dystopian negativism, but he was in a realm of possibilism. What can we do? We could encourage a state of possibilism where we have people showing this is how the world is, and then you can conclude for yourself.
Today I'm talking with Anders Indset. Anders is a best-selling author, a deep tech investor, and he's known as the Business Philosopher. His latest book is The Viking Code, The Art and Science of Norwegian Success. Anders, welcome to the show.
Stephanie, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. I'm very just grateful that you decided to come on Mission Daily today because I think we're going to dive into a lot of really fun topics. So to start, actually, I want to ask you, if I were to go and ask some of your friends, who is Anders Indset, what would they say? What would they tell me about you?
They would probably say I'm a curious learner. I'm a creative by heart and a freak nerd by nature, maybe. I like technology, math, but I also like to play the piano. So I'm just curious. I like to learn. I think that's the best description that people would give of me.
Amazing. And then have you always been this way? Like, was this just you as a child, or was this something that you developed over time?
Being active was always a part of my upbringing. There was in early years when I was doing all kinds of different sports before I focused on one. They described me as a Duracell rabbit on speed. So I was basically just very much all over the place in terms of, trying to learn things. I wanted to master every sport discipline. I was a heavy reader. I like to dig into management, leadership, business-wise, but I was also interested in philosophy and the deeper understanding of the nature of reality. So that was, even in my younger years, that was always a part of me. So I think it was something that was intrinsically baked into my whole being. So I think going all the way back to my birth, I've always been curious and active.
Yeah. And where were you born?
I was born in Trondheim, which is one of the largest cities in Norway, central part, a little bit south of the middle of Norway. 200,000 people live there today, but I grew up in a small World Heritage Culture, old mining town of Røros. Gets really cold, down to minus 30 in the wintertime. So I spent a lot of my years between 10, 11, 12 until I was 17, in Røros, which is a wonderful place. So I was born in Trondheim, but I grew up a lot of the years in Røros.
Amazing. So we're definitely going to be going a lot into Norwegian culture because that's kind of why you're here and a lot of things that we're going to talk about. So I want to go just right into it and ask you, what is the Law of Jante?
The Law of Jante was, there was an author back in 1932, Axel Sandemose, and he wrote about the commandments of Moses, but he wrote it in a sarcastic way, describing that you should not believe in yourself. You should not believe that you are better than anyone else. You should not stand out. There are similar cultural phenomena in the East where you cut the flowers the same size and keep everyone conditioned to be a part of the collective. And this was very much a part of the ethos in Norway. So we were told not to think highly of ourselves, not to believe in ourselves, because it was all about the collective. And the Law of Jante has pretty much served as the ethos of Norwegian culture over all these years until all of a sudden, and this is the phenomena that I get into my latest book in the Viking Code, where some of these young men, mostly men, decided to take back that spirit of the old ancient Vikings and believe in themselves and go out and quote unquote conquer the world, but not in a barbarian sense and at the cost of others, but in a part of also a collective sense. So this was kind of sort of what I discovered, having grown up with this Law of Jante, or Janteloven, as you would say in Norway, myself, and always been told by my parents and my surroundings not to stand out and just to keep your feet on the ground and be grounded. All of a sudden, I noticed that you could actually unify individualism and collectivism, and that was very much also the narrative of my latest book.
So what age were you when you started noticing men or people choosing differently and trying things out different than what their parents and the culture was telling them to do?
There were always things where Norway stood out, in particular in winter sports. Simple fact, we have snow. So it's a condition that is better than most other countries to be good at winter sports. But Norway was successful in many ways because it's a very rich country. It has oil, so there were resources there. But it wasn't until I started to dig into this high performance culture that was created that I discovered this overcoming of the Law of Jante. And I wrote a book last year, and what I discovered was basically I was writing a book about capitalism, and all of a sudden I noticed that all of these Norwegians were at the pinnacle of these gigantic sport disciplines that has nothing to do with snow: tennis, golf, soccer, running, even, beach volleyball or triathlon. We have all the best athletes of the world. And to me, that was very interesting, because Norway is not a culture of high performance that appreciate or values high performance. It's not like the individualistic US mentality. And I was very fascinated how that came to be, and I wanted to understand that. So I teamed up and called a trainer that has worked with a lot of these Olympia athletes, because I wanted to understand, is there a magical training, kind of sort of recipe for this success? And by doing so, I discovered what I found interesting. And when I started to write the book, was that they were not only the best at their game, the finite game that they're playing, but they were also the most liked. They were very popular. They were loved even by, competitors and referees and so on, because they were practicing fair play. And I said, wow, this is amazing, because what seems to be a contradiction, how can you serve the community, the collective, and still rise as an individual? And that to me was the beauty of this magical dance of individualism and collectivism. Then I wanted to discover and see that how can you unify that, or how can you maximize both, or how can you go after living a successful individual career measured in your goals that you put out, and how can you also be at service of others? And it turns out that if you buy into that and you serve the community or the team, and if everyone around you is playing at a higher level and you have an aspiration as an individual to grow, you are obviously better off competing and training and practicing against better people. So it becomes kind of sort of like a reinforcement learning model. And this is something that I discovered while writing the book last year. So up until then, it wasn't clear to me that the strong force of collectivism can actually serve as a recipe for individual success as well. So this is a new way to look at it. In the early 2000s, there were some athletes that broke out, but they did it at the cost of others. They weren't typical Norwegian. Although we were patriots, we didn't really fancy how they came across. And now these young athletes, young men, a lot of them, they are very popular. And that I really much wanted to see if there is something to learn here for education, politics, and business. And that was basically how the book also came to be.
To put it into perspective, because I will say I'm not a sports person, so I don't know who's coming from what countries and how good countries are doing. And so I would love for you to highlight, like, how big is Norway? And then how many athletes have come from there that are well known versus other parts of the world?
We're only about 5.5 million people living in Norway. So it's a small country. There are similar countries that have very many strong athletes. That is over proportional to the population. Croatia is one country that has produced a lot of great players in tennis and basketball and soccer and multiple other sports. But if you look at it, the generation that you see today, where Norway in a sport such as soccer has 2 or 3 players that are among the top 20 in the world, maybe even, that's very untypical. If you look at how many play in Brazil and South America, even in the US, soccer is a much, much bigger sport. Many, many more players play soccer in the US even than in Norway. And I haven't talked about Spain, France, Germany, England, all these countries. And having these young superstars is very untypical. The same you could say for tennis. The same you can go with golf, global sports where a Norwegian to lead the biggest tournaments last year, or Casper Ruud in tennis playing in multiple finals last year. That's not very typical. Take sports like triathlon, hundreds of thousands do triathlon, but the two best, not one, the two best are both from Norway. Even beach volleyball, as I mentioned, having the two best beach volleyball players. So I can't give you a set number, a percentage, and I haven't done the math, and I should have done my data on that, but it's a very high number in comparison to the population that have stood out in a very, and often you have like a cultural thing. So you could have many basketball players coming out of Lithuania, for example. So the former Russian Federation, they cherry picked all the talents and put them in a boot camp, training camp where you had the best trainers, and you formed an elite academy. If you look at tennis, you could compare that to Rafael Nadal in Spain, who has an elite academy. They produce superstars. It's like in Barcelona, you have the soccer academy and so on. But having this across disciplines, having this very, very diverse set of disciplines where many, many athletes have risen to the top, this is very untypical. And also the one thing that I get into in the book, which also relates very much to the time that we live in today, that I don't even know if Norwegians are aware of the success criteria themselves. I describe it as that we live in an era of generalization. And when I say so, it's that we have access to almost infinite knowledge. So having a broad toolbox that you can adapt to future changes becomes much more important than to be an expert at something. You will always have the superstars at the game in programming and developers. There are some superstars, but a lot of the excellent expert programmers will obviously be replaced by AI. And the same goes for the sport. So you need to adapt to new circumstances. And this is what they did with the training methodology in Norway, was that you started to specialize at a very late stage. So even myself, I played soccer, I did biathlon, cross-country skiing, and my Olympic handball that I played. So I had many, many disciplines, and it puts you in a position to form and shape a broad toolbox of things that, put you in a position to adapt to future scenarios. And I think this holds to be true in a world where we have no idea what kind of jobs there will be in 10 years and how things will evolve. So, living in that era of generalists was something that they did because they had an intuition of what we call a multidisciplinary approach to things was important without having the scientific data. Today, we see that young youth development programs, that having that diversity is very, very healthy for your body, for growth, for your mental models, and therefore the specialization comes at a much later stage. And this is, I think, one part of this Viking Code, of this model of how to build high-performance individuals in the collective environment.
I mean, when you think about the school system, at least here in the US, is very much built around, the Industrial Revolution, specializing on certain tasks. It doesn't really feel like connecting the dots between disciplines, even now, has really been happening. And so it makes sense to think, like, how do you get a lot of exposure to a lot of different concepts and modalities and industries, and then see how things connect? Because at least in my eyes, many of these things are all interconnected, but we've been viewing them in silos and, having kids operate in a factory mentality of like, now get good at this one math problem and now you're done. Okay, now get good at this one science thing. Okay, now you're done. Versus how can you become good at a lot of things? And then from there, be like, oh, now I really like physics. Okay, I'm going to go deep. But after you get exposure to a lot of things, so that totally makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, teaching people what to think is not the time that we're in. You give people the tools, teach people how to think, learn how to learn. That's the essence, because it becomes an intrinsic motivation to act, to be active. And why has performance become so exhausting? Because we are reacting. We are reacting to tasks, to things that are driven from the outside. An extrinsic motivation of what you want to be, what you should be, what is right and what is wrong. We have a maximize the art of being right, an optimization game that is built on a very binary way of looking at the world. Your opinion, my opinion, because that's what we were taught. We should have a right answer. We should have a solution, even if it's the wrong question. So I think what you say is 100% true. We need to get a much, much better understanding of the problem the first principle thinking and seeing the relation and seeing the interdependencies. And that requires that you're in a mental space to have that type of view of the world that is not where you're held hostage in your self-evident truth of the past. So I think this is very, very important today, and it requires a radical change in how education is done, starting with kids in very, very, very early age.
So how do you, earlier you said you need to teach people how to think. How do you do that? Because it feels like we're in a space right now that it's moving so quickly. And at least from my perspective, when you look at some of these younger generations, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if they know how to, because there's so much coming at them. There's so much stimulation. There's a lot of incentives out there that are guiding them down paths of distraction. So how do you go about teaching someone how to think, and how, okay, now you have all these AI tools in front of you. How do you actually make sure what you're getting makes sense? Like, how do you tune in with your intuition? How do you listen to that before, just jumping into whatever an answer off ChatGPT tells you? So like, what does that look like in today's world?
Yeah, that's a very, very relevant question. I think it's a very complex question. But what I think is that if you teach children at a very early age, give them self-trust, to get connected with themselves, to have confidence in themselves. So how do you build an environment where you can discuss topics in depth? You need to have trust. And how do you generate trust? If you trust yourself, then you can trust other people. So I think what we have done is that we have created a generation of insecure youth that are only comparing on the outside. I think the first thing we should do is to teach, to encourage people to trust themselves, and teach children to be strong and trust themselves. Because if you're strong with yourself, that's a core basis for giving trust and opening up. The other part that we need to emphasize, and this is the essence of knowing something and postulating absolutes, is that what is to me the core condition of what it means to be a human being? It's progress. It is not solutions. It is not answers. It is coming up with better problems or finding better explanations to things. It's the very essence of experiencing progress. This is how we are born. We are born with an empty storage. We are per se active. We want to get up. We want to rise. We want to grow. We want to learn. We are cherished on and clapped on by our parents. And then we continue. And then we are put into boxes where we are putting everything into, this is what is right, this is what is wrong. And social media fuel this because we build it a thumbs up, thumbs down society. So the reward mechanisms of our society are absolutes. It's a binary way of thinking. A reaction, a quick reaction, is the core to an incentive. An economical model, a like, a share, a follower, is all built on a quick reaction. Reflections aren't rewarded, right? So understanding that and the beauty of what it means to be a human being, coming back to education. I just came off an event last night where one of the parents asked me, how can we teach the children to cope with the world as if he has understood everything and I'm the strong parent, and what are the 5 things that we need to do? And I said, turn it around. You are the reason for this, because you were standing in front of your toddler saying you can be anything you want without any effort. You were looking up at you and saying, why? Just because you can. We have created a society of lost and insecure individuals that overplay their insecurity, by compensating on likes and shares of followers and dopamines and fueling that whole system. And I think taking that back to understand that creating strong individuals that believe in them, trust themselves as a healthy path to trusting others, and then finding places where you can generate friction. Trust and friction is the birth of progress if we can have a healthy discussion. A healthy discussion, of course, is based on the will to truth. So I would want to like to learn something. I want to have progress. And taking back that core model, and I think this is fundamentally important to human beings, because the more knowledge we have, the better AI becomes, the more significant this becomes for us. What distinguishes us from technology? If we are just reacting to all these impulses going about, we will create society of philosophical zombies. So I think the essence of experience progress, the experience of your own experience, that you have achieved something or learned something, that is fundamentally important to living a fulfilled life. So I think this is also should be a part of our educational model, and it should be a part of every parent's responsibility to give this to their children, as a comparison to just like wait 20 years and then blame them for all the craziness that they have started to tap into.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if many parents even know how to do that, because if I think about the years that have gone by and the decades, it's been cultures and governments and groups telling people how to think for a very long time. Yeah, if you think about, like, at least my parents, is like, the government says this and this is true. They said you should do this kind of school and this is true. And it's very much like I'm being told by a higher power who knows more than me, because they're speaking the most confidently, that this is how I should parent. This is what I should do with, education, healthcare, whatever. And it does feel like we're in a stage where people are questioning everything, which I appreciate. And I love seeing people questioning, where's this information coming from? How do we know this is truth? But like, give me maybe an example. If I'm a parent and I'm like, I want to raise a confident kid. I want them to trust their intuition and trust what makes them human, and, like, ask all the questions. Like, what's a good example of just one thing you can do with your kid to empower them and to not go down the slope of losing trust with themselves and others?
Let me ask you, isn't it so that we have a very interesting paradox? So we have a lot of young people, or an insane amount of people, questioning everything, the fundamental truth.
Yep.
At the same time, we have the same people held hostage in their self-evident truths. So they are questioning everyone else's view that does not cope with their own, but they are not open to question their own. So they are stuck, they're held hostage in their own mental models or structural concepts, yet at the same time questioning fundamental underlying truths that we have held on to for so many years, basic science and things that are, should be considered as more than a plausible truth. So I think this paradox is interesting to look at and say, how can you break that up? And I think this, coming back to the self-confident and also the trust in oneself, to say, like, am I lost and I'm only reacting and trying to find my role in society? Am I interested in learning? This becomes a different state of being. So I think a simple example of this is to spend the time with kids in the early years, to encourage them to try a lot of things and to be very active and to open their minds to many other views of the world, be it cultures, without taking a stance on what is good and what is right and what is wrong. So I think this is something that I think we can work on as a collective in terms of, supporting young people today, that it's not about like these type of mechanism that I have to optimize my child or whatever. And that is something that society and I totally resonate with what you're saying, because I think this is the difficult part. And how can we do that? How can we encourage, parents and children, and to be in a model where it is about learning and not about, postulating facts. And I think I was very fascinated by, and coming to answer your question now, by a guy 10 years ago, Hans Rosling. He founded the Gapminder Foundation. So he went on stage with very simple IKEA boxes and explained the world to the people. And everyone was like, yeah, I get this. It was very simple. He brought down facts back to a fact-based reality that we have a common ground to stand on. And he was not in that utopian optimism, everything will be good, or this dystopian negativism, but he was in a realm of possibilism. And I think this is, what can we do? We could encourage a state of possibilism where we have people showing this is how the world is. And then you can conclude for yourself, right? So take an example. Today, Africa has 1.5 billion people. They still get about 6 to 8 children. The difference is, this graph would show that the children do not die. So they have 8 children. What do you think? Do you think the population will grow or shrink, right? And most would say grow, right? Okay, what do you think will happen if the population grows? How much do you think? So they will have different numbers, and I can show a forecast that we're going to grow to 4 billion people. All right. So what do you think will happen then? Do you think all of them will live in poverty? Do you think they will try to swim over to Europe and Europe will sit there and drink Chardonnay and eat canapes and see how they drown? Most likely not, right? We're not like that. So, and everyone would say, come to that conclusion. We can build on that argument just by taking simple facts. And I think this is what also the models in schools should be about. What do you think? What do you think? Like, what do you think about technology? And do you think we'll go back and play Snake on our Nokia 5110 cell phones? Or do you think it will continue? Like, do you think batteries will be better or worse in 10 years? All these examples, you can go down every lane of how you can look at an exponential progress of the past 80 years of exponential growth in technology, where we have taken poverty down, where we live longer, where we have 8 billion people on the planet. And everything we relate to, and everyone is complaining about how terrible things are, we are always comparing to a utopian way of the future where everything is perfect. But life and humanity as a species at large is not about perfection, about utopia. It is about progress. And we have lived for the past 50 years in progress. Some are worse off at some times, but on a general note, we are moving in the right directions, even in terms of war. But then we have the populist and ideology agenda telling us how terrible things are, or crappy things are, We have it in Germany as well. And I asked them, how many terrorist attacks have we had in Germany the past 5 years? And everyone goes silent. They can't think of one. Mm-hmm. But they all think we have all these foreigners coming in. And I was like, look at the data, right? And this is the realm that I think we can move towards. It's a very slow transition, but this is how you say, what do you think if I show you this? Mm-hmm. And they say, 500 million people will start to fly, have never flown before. We're going to have a huge increase in people flying. Yeah, so we need to speed up to change the technology if we believe that that is bad for the climate, right? We need innovation, creation. That's what Hans Rosling did. So very long answer to your very good question. But I think taking people into the realm of possibilism and looking at, what do you think based on data and facts, I think that's a good starting point that we could become better at.
Yeah, it's funny because that's exactly what I was going to say is like with my kids, I've got 4 of them. And my number one question for them is always, what do you think? Like, I'm not the source of truth. Let me hear what you think about this and get them to ask me more questions to try and figure it out. And they're only 4.5 and 6.5, 2 4s, 2 6s. But that's like my favorite question. It's just like, I don't know, you tell me, what do you think about that? And just hearing how their brain is working and just seeing what comes from it and then like fill in a couple dots when they ask. But yeah, just letting them also feel the empowerment of like, oh, whoa, I got to that by myself. Or, oh, I thought of something my mom didn't even think about. Like, that's fun. And then when it comes to the possibilities of the future, I love that. I forget what I was just listening to or reading where it was a really good highlight of like where we've come from. And it talked about, I can't remember which country it was, but basically half the babies that were born didn't make it to age 5. And so babies didn't even get a name until they were after 5 years old because the parents didn't know, like half of them just didn't make it or more. And I'm like, that was our past. That's how it used to be. So where we've come from now, it's like now all the babies get names because it's a very small percent that die before age 5 because of technology and healthcare and everything that we've advanced to up until now. And so I think just remembering where we've come from is super important.
Yeah, and I agree with you with even taking that notion with the kids one step further. You have your kid is doing math, and you're going to look over and you're going to look at the page that she or he has written out, and you find 2 errors. And you said, okay, honey, this is wrong. So please look at that again. So the same thing applies here, right? Honey, how did you come to this conclusion? What was your thought process of coming to that result? And the mind operates in a completely different way. It's not about correcting and doing it again, but you realize where you made a mistake. And you have a very, much stronger conscious experience about that learning path. As comparison, is it right now? It's okay, got it, right? That's a different path to be on. The learning path is, okay, talk about how you came to that result. So instead of saying this is wrong, can you tell me what you did here? Oh, no, this is wrong, Daddy. I did something wrong here. I can tell you what. It's a completely different way. And you train your mind to think like that. And then you have an experience. So I don't go in and say, this is wrong. I just say, okay, can you tell me how you came to this result? It's a completely different, simple way to change the mind, to be in that learning state and experience it. And you experience progress. You experience, the micro steps. And if you have that fueled over time, then you condition your mind to change. And I think that if you make mistakes at a level where there are finite results, it's okay that it's a bad experience, right? It shouldn't be, it doesn't need to be nice and fluffy and, pink and colory and happy when you lose. It's that. It's more about the incentive for progress. The incentive for behavioral change needs to be stronger than the fear of losing. So as long as there is a drive towards a new thing, to the unknown, tapping into that space, as long as the drive for that is stronger, it's okay to have challenges along the way, right? And I think this is also a change in the mental model, that we're going to get people hungry to go beyond, to tap into the new, to dare to explore and to play with new things. And I think we can train very much this type of living through education, through parenting, and so on.
I love that. So I wanted to go back to earlier, you said, these babies, they show up here and they're a blank box. So they're waiting to be filled up with knowledge. And I wanted to question that a bit because I'm wondering, when I think about kids, I have twins, I'm an identical twin, grew up with basically the same parenting, same knowledge, same classes, and then seeing kids it seems like they came in here with a goal and a mission, and they're off kind of doing something that they chose sometimes when you're like, you literally had the same parenting as the other one. So I would love to hear your thoughts, and maybe this kind of gets into consciousness and how you think about who are we and where we come from, but I'd love to explore that a bit more of do you really think we're a blank box when we show up, or?
Well, we have the human genome. There are some preconditions, and we can obviously tap into. Some days I just came back from Abu Dhabi, where I spoke about or took on the question, are we living in a simulation? So I have some days that I sympathize very much with that. And there's very difficult. I wrote a paper together with my quantum physicist friend about, observations on the simulation hypothesis, basically coming to the conclusion that the only restriction that we have is the entropy. So basically, if a simulated computer simulates another computer, and 8 billion people simulates computers ad infinitum, eventually the computer comes to a halt, as long as the foundational computer underlies the same physical laws as the simulation within. So without any external intervention, the computer would eventually halt. That's the only restriction we have. But even that is up for grabs when you look at some papers on playing with entropy and claims such as space and time has had a good run and stuff like that. But so I have days that I sympathize with that. I have very many experiences also last week in the spiritual realm, where higher energy or forces, call it, the divine, some kind of relationship to a God, a creator, or something higher purpose. I can resonate very much with that also. These are things that I can play with from a philosophical standpoint. But we're getting it back to biology and taking for granted that there is a physical reality and it does not emerge out of conscious experience, but there is an external world to relate to, and we are a part of some kind of physicalism, that we are created as biological creatures. There is a cell that evolves, and there is some kind of human genome that has some preconditions. But in general, I would say that even though there are differences in our physical substances and creation, I would argue that a lot of the things happens out of the relationship to the experience that you have. So even for identical twins, there might be situations along the way that shape one or the other more in one direction. But I wouldn't say we are all born completely equal. That's not my argument. But I think the potentiality to fill that base substance is, for most human beings, is there to a much broader extent that we explore. And so we are much more conditions of our surrounding environments than we tend to believe to. And that's something that I strongly believe, that we are shaped very much by our surroundings, culture, where we are born. If you take religion, for example, you are born on a general note into that religion, right? It's not something that is genetically brought to you. So if you're born in one particular part of the world that has an under proportional dimension of that religion, you're not automatically tapped into that religious belief when you are 2 or 3, if your parents are not, or their surroundings. So I think there are many, many things that shapes us from our base reality. But yeah, obviously there are some genetics and some structures that are different. How that applies for the mind, that's a very interesting question. And also when it comes to consciousness and conscious experiences. And there are so many interesting studies going on in the field of neuroscience, but also in the consciousness area, that if you look at people that explore a lot of psychedelics and do a lot of spiritual practices, they seem to tap into some intellectual, I would say, some intellectual realm that is also beyond. A lot of these people seem to hold a lot of knowledge and tap into some knowledgeable hidden secrets that is not given in the base reality or the base perception. So yeah, I think there are many things there that we today do not even scratch the surface, maybe even on what that is.
Yep, I agree. I've seen a lot of different spiritual beliefs now being proven through science, which is super interesting. Like things that were more like, oh yeah, that's really woo-woo, or okay, you had an amazing psychedelic journey and you're telling me the fabric of reality and how you can shift it. And when you look at it, it's going to change. And like you see things in those spaces that now seem to actually be coming true with some science, and it's also like disproving certain things, but it's like, seems like the moment where all of this is like coming together that for a long time people couldn't prove. It's just like they would see it and they try to explain it to someone who never had that experience, and they'd be like, I don't know how to explain God and infiniteness and the creator. And I saw it and I touched it and I felt it, and it's not what you think. And like, but how do I explain it? Or how do I explain reality if you've never seen it this way before? And a lot of it to me seems like it's like getting out of your own head and then seeing what can come through in those spaces that like your brain can only get you so far. That's at least what I believe. Like you only have what you have, and you can learn and you can grow. But then when you get out of the way of that sometimes and allow other thoughts to come in, let's just say from a higher source, that's where some of the magic can happen, and just open up your mind into like, oh, wow, I don't know what I don't know. And now the older I get, the less I know. And now I'm going to keep exploring, and I'm going to be an explorer for life and stay curious for life until I can find all the codes that maybe I left myself.
Yeah, I like what you did there, because I think this is to me where I listen, and I'm agnostic on absolutes, right? And as long as you say I cannot explain it with words.
Yeah.
As long as we have that state, so that we jump to very many like conclusions that it's not, we have knowledge. When you play with knowledge, you have to know your assumptions, right? So we say the human being is a human being because we have empathy, or yada yada yada. Right? And but I think first of all, empathy is it's not a soft skill; it's a hard skill. I think it's something that if a robot can make us cry or give us goosebumps, or I can react to someone who is very, very sad and they say, oh, you're so empathetic, and I have no inner feeling about that experience. It just tells me that this is something that is different. So as long as there is something that we cannot explain, I think we're in a good space. So as long as we don't know what the mensch is, the human being, we don't know what it is, as long as even if we create artificial human intelligence or artificial conscious entities, that we know that they have an inner life, but we still know that we are different than they are, but we don't know how and what, then we're in a good space, because then we're a part of that journey. And that is, I think, also part of this Eastern philosophy, to say that, okay, we are on a wonderful journey to nowhere. And instead of living a life where we are driven by external goals and absolutes, it is much more about, filling your life with an intrinsic action, that you do something that you experience. So you fill your life in order to have a fulfilled life. So you give meaning to life, as in comparison to search for meaning in life. The same applies also for happiness. You cannot make yourself happy, but you can make yourself less unhappy by distinguishing and saying, this is something that I do not want to do. This is something that is holding me back. This is something I can let go of. If you thin slice that and do that over time, you free up that space that you put yourself in a position to be struck by something called happiness, where you're in a space where you can experience, that positivity. And that is, I think, a lot about, that what it means to be a human being, the life that we live, that, getting out of that reaction mode into an active mode of, giving meaning to life. And this is also very much a deeper underlying of my book, where I write about success. So I get, the title is The Art and Science of Norwegian Success. That's the subtitle of the book. And then it was, well, Norwegian successful. Why are you saying that? I said, you haven't read it. It's about success defined, where I am a person who has experienced this firsthand. I was good at sport from an external view, professional athlete. I built my companies. I was a hardcore capitalist. From an external view, I was successful. I never experienced success. Today, I consider myself highly successful to me, because I get up every morning and learn 7 days a week and experience progress. And this experience of the wonders of the ordinary, that is what makes to me for a lively life, the vitality of life, or Lebendigkeit, as we would say in German, a wonderful word that you cannot translate. And this is, I think, something that we need to rediscover, the Lebendigkeit of life, how to live an active life and fill your life in order to have a fulfilled life.
I love that. I'm German and I don't know a lot of German words, but that one I actually have heard before. I love that. Yeah. When I think about living a life where you feel successful, I also just wonder if it's a reprogramming of self and being able to decide like what feels successful to you, and really just sitting with that and like not letting the noise of the outside influence, I need to have this job, I need to make this money, I need to do this, and just sitting with self and being like, what actually like fills me up? What fills up my cup? What does that day look like? And getting into that where you embody it so deeply that you actually know, what does it feel like to be happy? Because I think a lot of people just don't even know, because they don't sit quiet enough, long enough to experience like, oh, peace is happy. This is happy. Or this is how I feel happy. Or just sitting outside for 10 minutes and staring at a tree is happy. Like, it's just so noisy and so many expectations. And I think if people could just sit quietly and embody the feelings of their own success and happiness and joy, then it'd be easier to cut through it and actually tap into, yourself and your heart.
No, I think there's very much valuable or very, very valuable lessons to be learned there. But as you said before, I think it's very difficult for people in their lives to do so, because we are so busy. A lot of self-help gurus tell us to slow down, but it's difficult to slow down if you have so much shit going on, if you're packed, We never had more time today than in human history, we never had more time to our disposal as today. Right? We have so much time because we have so many things that makes our life so efficient, but we just have too much crap going on. And if you slow down, then you just make it worse, right? So I think that this is something that a lot of people are challenged to tap into. So I think also, what you said about like reprogramming the self, I would also argue that it is also about deprogramming the self. So the illusion of the self, to say there is one condition, who am I, right? The self that we hold on to. I am like this because. I say, do you like that? You're not like that. You're not that's not you. The question is, do you like that? And you say, well, no, there's things that I don't like. It's okay, why? So if you know what that is, why do you continue then? You're not set in stone. You are a becoming. You are a journey of, progress. But if you hold on to these base conditions and say, this is a part of who I am, then you are stuck and held hostage in that reality. And I think that is just as much to learn about how to deprogram the self and said, what is it that I don't like about the state that I'm in? If I feel happiness, then I'm happy, right? It's something that I don't need an explanation. If I'm happy today, why are you happy, Anders? It's like, well, it's irrelevant, actually. You just feel that happiness, and I want to enjoy that. If you're sad, if you're tired, if you're worn out, if you're not happy, you could pinpoint quite many things that could relate back to that. And therefore said, well, if you're not happy with this, why continue? It could be a relationship, it could be daily chores, it could be your status in life of things that you want to achieve, and so on and so forth. And I think never have we had the capability to influence our own reality to that extent that we can. And that to me has a lot also with the deprogramming of the self, not holding on to a fixed reality of who I am, but much more saying that I'm a part of a process of being. And I think this is something that people can relate to. Just write down one thing, two things that you don't like, and try to take that out or leave it behind or let go.
Anders, this has been amazing. So I want to leave our listeners, our viewers, everyone who's tuning in with just a couple key takeaways, because we've gone through a lot when it comes, we're exploring consciousness and spirituality and how to, grow self-confidence and Norway. And so I'd love to just go through some key highlights of how do we apply this in daily life?
Yeah. I think first of all, what most of us can practice today is to anticipate the future. So just sit and think about, if this happens, what kind of future do I envision? 1, 2, 3, maybe different scenarios. Instead of reacting to past and news. This is one of the base core things that I believe in. I call this anticipated future. The other part that I think that we also talked upon is how do we restore trust in institutions, in society, in science, in the future. I think here we could start by teaching people how to trust themselves, building self-trust, becoming clear with yourself and in your journey. So self-trust would be number 2. And I think what we started in the beginning, which is also an important takeaway, is that if everyone around me is doing better, and there's a beautiful word in Norwegian, it's also in my book, it's called dugnad. It's like voluntary work without the work. You just show up for the others, and you help people rise. And that holds true also for organizations, and especially in sport. If you have aspiration to grow as an individual and you're motivated and you want to move on, you're better off if everyone around you are playing at a better level. So if you uplift others, it becomes a reinforcement learning model where you can grow as an individual. And that is the unification of, or maximization, you can even see, of individualism and collectivism. And those 3 parts. And the fourth part is, as a bonus, would be to understand that the future will most likely come, and it will mostly likely be part of an exponential speed up of technology. So whatever you can envision on the rapid growth of progress, climate, health, wealth, whatever, will come out of that technological progress. I'm a strong believer in technology, but I'm also a very strong believer in the potential of the human being, the human growth. So that would be the fourth part.
Amazing. I love that. Perfect way to wrap this up. I want to also quickly go to a quick lightning round with you, though, because I feel like you'll have some good, quick answers here. So the lightning round is where I'm going to send a couple questions your way, and you have under a minute to just answer them rapid fire. Are you ready?
You give me a minute. That's good.
Yeah, 1 minute.
Yeah, I have to have some seconds to come up. I'm a super speedy lightning round. So give me a minute. That's very kind of you, Stephanie.
Yeah. All right. So the first one, what are your top 3 favorite books other than your own? Because we will give that one, of course, a shout out in a bit. But what are your top 3 favorite books, whether they're philosophy books, leadership books, business books, something that's really impacted you?
I could go into deep philosophical books, but thick books. But I would take one that it changed me a lot in my way of thinking was The Finite and Infinite Game by James P. Cars. theologist, thinking like a philosopher. It was very interesting. I play a lot with Albert Camus and the Mythos of Sisyphus today because I'm writing a new existentialism that is based on a state that I called undead. So I, having read that over and over again, that was a book that changed me a lot. Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. And the third one would be more business related. I could take Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, that very much outline how to build a high performance culture that is based on values and creativity, where you don't judge and talk about, things being right or wrong, but you include concepts such as plussing, where they would take different characters to the meeting and all the drawers that were doing outlining the cartoons, you would come in and they would say, well, I like what you did with that face and the ears and the eyes. Maybe we could try it with a mouse instead of a rat. So you have a positive way of communicating instead of saying like, okay, I don't like the mouse, you should be a rat or whatever. Many, many lessons learned on how Steve Jobs and Ed Catmull set up Pixar that I think is a fascinating book about leadership and also about creativity.
I love that. Yeah, that's some good ones. One of those I didn't know, but the other ones, yeah, amazing. What piece of technology are you playing with right now that you're most excited about? And it could be a tool. It could just be like, I just discovered this thing and it blew my mind.
Yeah, no, I'm invested in one of the leading quantum tech companies in the world, Terra Quantum, and I'm very fascinated about the development in that field. There are so many things that are 2025 is the year of quantum science and technology. It's put on the agenda from the UN and UNESCO. And I think 2025 will be the year where we start to migrate to a lot of these quantum technologies, not necessarily a stable quantum computer, but quantum tech will become a thing. And eventually that will be AI on steroids. It will have changed everything we do in finance and also in terms of security, of course. It will open up boundless, possibilities in how to have progress in chemistry and biology. So we'll probably have the periodic system go from today's 118 elements up to 130, and that will just put in maybe a double exponential growth to a lot of these industries. So I'm very, very curious about the development in quantum tech, but I'm also very interested in all the things that are happening in the space of health tech in terms of longevity and development on coming back to the part of the biology, obviously, but to see how these things evolve. I'm also invested in a company that is now doing 3D genome sequencing, where they're taking the genome sequencing cost down from $600-700 to less than $10, which will obviously open up a lot of possibilities. So those are the technology developments that I'm very, very curious about. And obviously 2025 will be a year of humanoids and AI agents, which will put a lot of pressure on the labor force. I'm also thinking about the other side of technology. What do we do with all these human beings? Then that will be then automated out of the labor force. And that's something that I think a lot about.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, what's a weird hobby or something you're interested in that most people don't know about?
I love going in the dark, putting out a headlamp and cross-country skiing, skating most people in Germany and when I travel to the US or in Asia would not think of me as a cross-country skier, but I love to go into the dark at minus 20 degrees Celsius with a white beard and a headlamp into the forest all by myself. That's something that I really, really love doing. I'm going to do it in the wintertime every year in Norway. I go Christmas, I go Easter, especially like in January when it gets really dark and cold. I like to do that. And that's a pretty weird, I think, hobby that I have. If that is
awesome.
weird, that'd be one. Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do that, so I consider that interesting. That's cool.
You would want to do that though. When you see suddenly when the moon comes out, you see that yellow big thing on the sky. It's so freaking cold. And it's just you and the forest, and you listen to that icy cold snow and you're just floating there. And that is a time where you are so close to nature. It's a very, very special thing. And you can hear the silence, It's not something that you come from practicing a meditation. It's just a real life, out of the sport, out of the living experience where you're at awe. There is something beautiful about that. So I think most people would cherish that if they could go for a skating in the Norwegian forest.
Yeah, you convinced me. I'm down. All right. Well, Anders, this has been wonderful. Where can people learn more about you and find your book, The Viking Code, and find your upcoming books and everything you're up to?
singularityparadox.com. That's our forthcoming book about bridging humanity and AI. My recent book is the Viking Code. It's on viking-code.com, but everything can be found on andersindset.com on my website. Some articles, there's a section called Sci-Fi, PHI, Science Philosophy, where my colleague and I dance at the outskirts of mind and matter. Some cool papers there. I'm on LinkedIn. So those are the main channels where people can read up and link up.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and we'll see you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. This was wonderful.